Go. Awesome. So I will kick this off. My name is Sarah Lunas Robinson. I am the executive director with the Kingfield Neighborhood Association and the acting director with the Lyndale Neighborhood Association. And I work with both groups. In Lyndale, it's a housing committee, and in Kingfield, it's the redevelopment committee, both of which look at the built environment of their respective neighborhoods. So this is a joint committee meeting with our guest from the Minneapolis Park and Rec Board, Adam Arvidson. Am I saying that correctly?
Very, very close. Arvidson.
Arvidson, sorry. Adam Arvidson, who's here to talk to us tonight about what are park dedication fees, how can they be used, how have they been used, what hasn't been thought of before, and sort of their history in the city of Minneapolis. So he has a presentation, and then we're going to do Q&A. I think we're a small enough group that you don't feel that you have to put your questions in the chat. Feel free to interject as needed for clarifications. Is that okay, Adam? Okay, cool.
Definitely, yes.
Quick roll call here. If you can just say your name and what neighborhood you're with, that would be great. Jim, you want to jump in first?
Yep, Jim Cooman, Chair of the Redevelopment Committee for Kingfield.
Awesome. And then Ed is here also from another.
Janicic from the Lyndale neighborhood on the board and also chair of the housing committee. Welcome, Adam.
Great. Joanne?
Hi, Joanne Shapla. I'm from Kingfield and part of the redevelopment committee.
Great. Nice to see you 2 days in a row. Ryan?
Hello, I'm Ryan Bloomberg. I'm part of Lyndale neighborhood and new to the area and to the state as of 2 years ago. So learning a little bit more about neighborhood associations and possibly taking a bigger role if I can.
Great, thank you, Ryan. And Kelly, are you online?
I'm here. Yeah, hi, I'm Kelly O'Brien, a resident of the Kingfield neighborhood and member of the redevelopment committee.
Great, thank you. So I will let other people in. Adam, you may take it away.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks everyone for being here tonight. As Sarah mentioned, I'm going to do a brief overview of park dedication, kind of a park dedication 101, and then talk specifically about Lyndale and Kingfield. And then hopefully that'll kind of launch into a conversation or questions or whatever, wherever you want to go with it. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Adam Arvidson. I am the Director of Strategic Planning for the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. In that role, I lead the department that does all of the long range and large scale planning of our park system. I work on creating the 6-year capital improvement plan for the park board, which determines how money is spent to physically improve our parks. And I also, my department oversees the real estate portfolio of the park board. So acquisitions, protects it from encroachments, things like that, and also manages the park dedication program. So from time to time, I go out to neighborhood organizations, either by their invitation or by mine sometimes, and talk about this because we're interested in hearing how the neighborhood organizations, how the residents there in those neighborhoods are interested in spending this money, which is coming into the coffers of the park board from development fees. So I'm going to share my screen here and do a bit of a slideshow. And then, like I said, we can open up for questions. Can everybody see this slideshow okay? Park dedication update. Excellent. So I'm going to do some basics here. I'm going to talk about current funding levels and then also share a bit about project selection, how we decide to spend this money. So when it comes to park dedication, this is an ordinance that was passed in 2014. It came into effect on January 1st of that year. All development within the city must provide park dedication. all development that is except for affordable housing units and government entities. So park dedication is a user fee that is codified in a concurrent ordinance between the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, or MPRB, and the city itself. So the way it works is the city takes in money when developments happen, and the park board spends that money on parks. There are 3 ways to satisfy this ordinance. Most people think of this as a park dedication fee ordinance, or sometimes it's even called the park dedication fee ordinance. It's not the fee only. So there are 3 ways to satisfy the requirements of the ordinance, and they actually appear in the ordinance in this order. So first, a developer must dedicate land to the park board. That can be the case when we have master planning efforts in an area that says that we want land, that there might be a park gap in an area, or we have identified for there to be additional park land created. In that case, most recently, this was executed in the North Loop area where things are very dense, but where we are interested in park connections. Developers actually have to provide fee title to a portion of their property when they develop. And that's up to a maximum of 10% of that property area. And that's mainly designed so that we can make trail connections or small park spaces where there are none. If the park board is not interested in land in a particular area, which is like 99% of the time, then there is the payment of a fee. And the amount of that fee is keyed toward the number of housing units. It's running right now like $1,650 per housing unit. And then there's also a per employee per square foot fee, which is a little more complicated, for industrial and commercial development. Minneapolis does charge a fee on industrial and commercial and retail development, which is actually unusual among park dedication fees. And then the third option is that a developer might provide private land for public use. So sometimes a developer will give a permanent easement over land. They will develop that land with trails or parks, and then they will maintain it over time. And that's a way of essentially paying down their fee. So there are 3 ways, and those happen in order. We've developed a strong relationship with the city to really be at the table when land needs to be developed, or when land needs to be dedicated, rather than the sort of automatic knee-jerk reaction that it's a fee. So park dedication basics, we do have a map online. I can drop a link in the chat once we get back to that part of the conversation. We have a public-facing map that shows all the fees that are paid, how they might have been allocated, and you can also click on a neighborhood to see how much money is available in that neighborhood. So it's a good interactive map if you want to keep up to date, and we update that map monthly. Fees accrue when developers pay their building permits, and then the city transfers those funds monthly. So sometimes in neighborhood conversations like this, people will ask me about a specific project. You know, hey, there's a big hole in the ground over there, and I don't see it on your map yet. There might be a couple of reasons for that. First of all, a developer can pull an excavation permit and dig their underground garage and get a whole lot going without actually pulling a building permit yet, which means they haven't paid their park dedication fee yet. Also, because it takes a month for the city to get us the fee and a few weeks after that for us to update the map, sometimes there's just a lag. From the park board perspective, until that money actually kind of hits our bank account, we can't plan for it. So neighborhoods often know well before the park board does about developments that are coming, and even sometimes their estimated fees. But unfortunately, I can't do anything with that money until it comes to the park board, because sometimes a development will be moving along, and then it'll change or it'll get scrapped. And so we can't count on that money until it's actually in the bank for us. A couple of real critical things that are in ordinance and supported by lots of case law over decades is that there has to be a geographic nexus to these developer fees. Just like in the suburbs, sometimes developers will pay roadway access fees or sewer and water fees. Those cities couldn't go build roadways on the other side of town. They would have to serve that development with those roads. Same is true of park dedication fees. They have to be spent nearby where they were generated. And in Minneapolis, the nexus, the geographic nexus, is the neighborhood boundary. It's not a half mile. That's sort of a safety valve for neighborhoods where there is not a park. But in this case, we're talking about fees have to be spent in the neighborhood in which they were accrued. They also must be spent on new park elements or expansion of service of the park system. The idea here is that new families have moved into the neighborhood area, and we have to provide new recreational amenities for them, or we have to increase capacity. So for instance, resurfacing a tennis court as an existing tennis court would not be eligible for park dedication money. But if we added pickleball courts to that area, that would. If we added lights to a ball diamond, that would be eligible because we're increasing capacity of the ball diamond, right? More people can play for longer hours. So that's really the rule of thumb that we have to look at. Fees can be spent on any type of parkland, regional or neighborhood, and also on trail connections or other connections to parkland, and they can be used to acquire additional parkland. In our view, fees really need to implement approved master plans for the parks in an area. So we don't want to do something random. We want to use those fees to implement the visions that the community, in most cases, spent years with us developing. So selecting projects, here's kind of how we do it. There's not a strict requirement in the ordinance for how projects are selected, except for this. All of the expenditures are determined by the Park Board of Commissioners. Even land that is accepted in lieu of fees has to be approved by the Board of Park Commissioners. Those have to be made through our annual capital improvement plan, either during the annual budget process or as an in-year amendment to that CIP. So in the ordinance, that is the way that they are officially allocated, is through the capital improvement plan. Unlike NRP, the neighborhood organizations actually don't decide how the fees are spent. However, we frequently consult, like tonight, with neighborhood organizations to get guidance on how those are spent. But the ultimate decision does rest with the Board of Commissioners. And then again, in line with master plans, you'll see that's a theme with me. So when we think about as staff, which projects to start putting into the CIP or when to consult with neighborhood organizations, I like to think about asking 3 questions of a particular neighborhood area. The first question I ask is how much money is available? Is there more than $50,000 available? For a public agency like us, if there is less than $50,000 available, it's hard to initiate a new project. We just simply, we can't even get the administration costs going for that amount of money. The second question is how many parks are in a neighborhood? Are there more than one? If there's more than one park, we need to think about how the park dedication funds get allocated. And then lastly, is there a capital project coming up soon? Is there something in that CIP in the neighborhood area? So based on these questions, I start to classify the neighborhood areas in terms of what we're going to do with them. So for instance, if there's not more than $50,000, and if there's no capital project coming up soon, regardless of how many parks are in the neighborhood, we call this a type 0. And I'll get to what that means in 1 second. If we do have a capital project soon, and there's only one park, we call that a type 1. And if things are a lot more complex, like there's a lot more money, there's more than one park, we call that a type 2. So in those type 0 areas where there's no capital project and not a lot of money, we actually have to wait. That money does not expire, but it's very hard for us to spend that in the near term. Those middle ground projects, type 1s, where we have a capital project and we have one park in a neighborhood, the decision is fairly easy, and we tend to add those funds to the capital project that's going on. It allows us to expand that capital project, do more for the community, and also create a whole lot of efficiencies of scale. But this last one is the complicated one, and that's when we consult with the community. How are we going to make the decision on how this is spent? Either there's a lot of money sitting there that we should be spending, or there's multiple parks in a neighborhood, and we need some help making that recommendation. So with that, I'm going to talk specifically now about Lyndale and Kingfield, and we'll just look at where we are with those two, and then that's about going to be it, and I'll open it up for a discussion or questions about the program or about your neighborhood specifically. So in Lindale, a total of about $100,000 has accrued since the beginning of the park dedication ordinance. There are 2 existing park areas in Lindale. I'm probably telling you things you know, but it's always good to reiterate it. Painter Park and the Lindale School Pool. But according to the Southwest Parks Plan that was adopted, the Lindale Pool will be decommissioned and instead there will be a splash play area added to Painter Park. So that's how we're gonna manage aquatics going on into the future. So that does figure into decision making. Because then there's really only 1 park in the neighborhood, and we do have a capital project happening right now at Painter Park. We have previously allocated $87,000 to that project. And in the draft CIP that was just presented to the board last week, it was proposed to allocate the remainder to that same project. So what we've suggested here to the Board of Commissioners is that we have a capital project happening in the only park in that neighborhood. That capital project is actually asking people what their priorities are for improvement. And the addition of the park dedication money allows us to do more of those priorities during that capital project. Kingfield is a different story. In Kingfield, we have $216,000 roughly that has accrued and is available in the Kingfield neighborhood area. No allocations have been made. There is 1 very large existing park in the area, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Park. Currently, that ranks number 71 on the MPRB equity metrics. It is not in the CIP currently. I would estimate it'll be a year 2028 or 2029 allocation. So let's just say that's a long ways off, and we don't have any immediate plans for how this park dedication money should be spent. It is possible, therefore, to do a standalone project in that park. We don't have to wait for a capital project. We could do something in the short term. That should still implement some aspect of the park plan, but it's also dependent on staffing capacity and how many projects in a given year we can take on. So I'll go back to this chart that I mentioned to you before, or that I showed to you before, and just note that Lindale neighborhood was falling into this category 1, where there was a capital project coming soon, and there was only 1 park in the neighborhood. So we added funds to the capital project that's going on now. When it comes to Kingfield, this is where we have a more complicated decision making. There is more than $50,000. Though there's not more than 1 park in the neighborhood, we do not have a capital project coming soon. So the chart here isn't perfect, but suffice it to say this is a little more complicated. And so this is where we want to consult with the community. So I will leave that little chart up there for now. Actually, you know, I'm going to stop sharing so we can see each other. And then I will feel free to entertain whatever questions and let the second half of the meeting be directed by wherever you want it to go. So that's the 101, that's the basics, and the floor is yours.
I would suggest that we entertain Lindale questions first, because it sounds like that's going to be a rather short rat hole.
Yeah.
I don't have any questions. It sounds like the money has already been assigned. It's a done deal. I know there's some new development coming on. I'm not too sure how much of that qualifies to even be to utilize or gain development fees from right now for the projects I'm aware of in Lindale. There's only 1 that I think is going to generate fees.
So,
but again, that's a future thing based on what you said, Adam. It's not something that we can even talk about now. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I would say in Lindale, there's, along with the Painter Park project, there's been a pretty comprehensive conversation with the community about what the priorities are in that park. And there's some new elements that are being implemented or proposed to be implemented there, most notably a skate park. And so this park dedication funding is really going to help us get that done and to make it better and be able to do more right now, which increases efficiency a lot. If we let that money sit, we'd be in a similar situation where it would be hard for us to initiate a project at some later time. So that's why we tag it on to those capital projects and try to do more right along the same timeline. It's also often less disruptive to the community if we're going to be doing construction in a park to just do more construction at the same time instead of coming back a second time.
Makes sense.
So I do have a question though, because I have not understood that when the park board is planning to decommission the pool, who is going to take ownership of that land? Are you giving up all rights to the school district?
The land is not the park board's now. We have a long-term lease with the school board. It is their land. And I should stress that that pool is in good repair and won't be immediately decommissioned. It's just at which time it reaches the end of its useful life. And some pools of that age, like we've got pools that are that age that are in failure. I think the statement by the master planning is that we would then decommission that pool and then do an aquatics project at Painter. And without getting too into the weeds of the CIP, but it does matter, Lindale School Pool ranked very high on the equity metrics. So it has had an allocation in the CIP, which this year in the proposed draft is an allocation that is shifted mostly to Painter. So whenever that pool is decommissioned in that same project year, we would decommission the pool and implement aquatics at Painter. So there should be no interruption of aquatic service in the neighborhood.
Okay.
I'd read through the master plan section for all the parks in the area, so that's an interesting that's an interesting little note about how that mechanics works, because it wasn't really clear from that document, because that's the high level document, what the timing looks like. You know, it's a long standing document. It's not meant to be strategic in that way, because things change obviously from year to year. So I do have a question on what is a couple of us here were on the call the other night, the Painter Park call, the detailed planning call that's in the phase 1 for that. I don't remember, because I'm pretty sure it's in the plan. Is there a rough order of magnitude for the length of time and the amount of money that is intended to be spent at Painter over, say, the next 5 years because of the phasing of that plan?
I'm on mute, sorry. So the project at Painter Park that's going on right now, I would need a minute to look up exactly the dollar amount being invested in that. I'm sure it's in the neighborhood of $1 million.
We heard 900,000 for phase 1 the other night.
Yep,
yeah.
900, and then there would be park dedication added to that. But that sounds about right. But then, so the way investments in neighborhood parks go, with our basic CIP, like not park dedication, is that parks are invested based on their equity ranking. So every park gets an equity ranking. Painter has had a high equity ranking. In fact, right now, this year, it's number 14, which is why it's been in the CIP for quite a while. But also, we're going to touch every park in the city before coming around again to additional parks.
Can you explain the ranking a little bit, or just, kind of how the numbers work? Or
Sure. So I have a great slideshow on this too, but I won't try to dig it out right now. So we actually have the first in the nation CIP that uses data-driven equity metrics to schedule projects. Nobody else does this. And what's unique about our system is that we look at the actual facilities in the park, but we also look at the community around that park as part of the decision-making. So we have 7 metrics, 4 of them are community metrics, and 3 are park metrics. And the community metrics are whether a park is in an area of concentrated poverty that is more than 50% people of color, also formerly known as an RCAP, or a racially concentrated area of poverty. We look at density, youth population, and crime statistics. Those are the 4 community characteristics. The park characteristics are the quality of the major assets in the park, the longevity of them. So are they within their useful life range, or are they beyond it? And then lastly, how much has been invested in that park in the past 15 years. So parks that have not been invested in recent past get a higher score. So based on that, we rank 152 neighborhood parks. And then we invest in them and bring them into the CIP in that way. So Painter Park is a bit of a lucky duck because of the master planning. And here's why. Lyndale School Pool, which was ranked number 2, is being decommissioned. So we can't spend its CIP allocation there. That's why we want to shift the aquatics to Painter. So in the draft proposed CIP that I just presented to the board last week, we have retained about $100,000 at Lyndale School Pool in the year 2025, essentially to decommission the pool. And the remaining $831,000 of that Lyndale School allocation was shifted to Painter. So Painter gets a second bite of the apple pretty quickly, in part because of that master planning decision to shift aquatics from a site that we don't own into the park that we own and operate. So Painter gets an allocation as proposed in 2025 of 831. All of the parks in our system will be invested in by the time NPP 20 expires. The expiration of that program is 2036. I expect we will touch every park by 2034, and we'll start over again on the highest priority parks. It's impossible to know at that point what the demographic characteristics are going to be in the city. That's my biggest caveat. However, Painter Park ranked high before, and it may again. So it's possible that there'll be third bite of the apple before NPP 20 is completely up. And of course, if we do our job with NPP 20 and really invest in these parks, but don't get all the way done, I think we would hope that that would be re-upped for another 20 years. But I'm getting way ahead of myself.
And I know you can't forecast dollars up to 2025, but I did hear that the price tag of the splash pad was going to be easily $1 million. And so do you
I think there is a rough budget, right? There is a rough budget for the investment in total, right? Over 10 years or something. I mean, there's got to be a really rough number, right? For the plan, for the master plan improvements, right?
The master plan does include a cost estimate, yes. And all of these, so the CIP, the NPP 20 funding that we get from the city was just increased this year. So it's no longer static year over year like it was for the first 5 years. It now escalates every year to try to keep up with inflation. So that number for the splash pad was escalated. It's higher than it was in the CIP even last year. Let me say that unlike, and then we should get back to park dedication a little bit, although I'm fine talking about all this stuff. A splash pad is a little bit more flexible in terms of its budget number and what you can implement. So a wading pool, they're typically a certain size, a wading pool like kind of always costs the same. Whereas a splash pad can flex a little bit with size depending on what money you have. So $1 million estimate, I mean, yes, you can build $1 million splash pad. You don't have to build $1 million splash pad, but I think we'll have to cross that bridge, so to speak, when we initiate that project in a few years.
Okay, so I think you answered one of my questions, because we know that there's a project coming online in Kingfield that will put, I just looked it up, about $330,000 into the park dedication fees. So your plan would be to capture that money in 2025 when the pool's decommissioned and the phase 2.
Whoa. Hey, yeah, we're crisscrossed there though. Are you talking about, you mean Lyndale? There's a project coming on board, is that what you're saying? Okay, well, and there's possibly, 2, so pick one, say you've got 50% shot at it. Although, so you're basically saying that if 35, 36 goes, is what you're saying, Sarah?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, and
Yeah,
that's
because the other two projects I'm aware of are both affordable housing, so they won't be contributing. Right. So here's my question for Lindale. What if the Lindale neighborhood has other ideas before the capital improvements back on the table? What if there's other land that Lindale would like the park board to acquire and use for example, as community garden space? How does that conversation get started?
Right here is how it gets started. So, and again, I always appreciate your eyes on the ground on development projects that are coming in. I just can't trust the numbers until they show up in our coffers. Mm-hmm. I have seen development projects collapse even after having pulled an excavation permit. So they leave a big hole in the ground for 3 years and the park dedication fee never comes in. So you'll understand I have to proceed with quite a lot of caution. However, if Lindale wants to start a conversation about other parcels of land, then I would think I would raise two things into that discussion. Number one is in the Southwest Parks Master Plan, are there particular park gaps or pieces of land identified for acquisition? I'm not as familiar offhand as of that plan, so I don't know if there were park gaps identified in the neighborhood. Clearly using park dedication money to do acquisition to fill an identified park gap in our master planning would clearly be allowable and encouraged. In terms of community gardens, we are regularly on the lookout for additional community garden spaces. Our community garden program, since we revisioned it and hired a full-time community garden coordinator, has been just hopping. We've got more people that want plots than we can build. It's expanding every year. Know that we are also, if these are city-owned community garden lots, we are in conversation with the city about some of those transferring to the park board. So there's an ongoing interagency collaboration that may result in the transfer of some gardens to the park board in order to preserve them. However, if we're talking about non-city owned parcels or new gardens that want to be started, then yes, it would be possible for us to use park dedication to acquire land to then implement a community garden, especially if it's in an area that is underserved by them. And I think what I'd love to know is, are there specific parcels you have in mind? And then we can kind of look into the feasibility of that. And I'd need to know kind of who's owning them now. You know, I have looked at this for other neighborhoods. And, you know, sometimes those lands, as you may know, those lands are held by developers and used on a temporary basis. And as soon as you want to buy it from them, they want market rate for their, you know, 14-plex that they were going to put there. And then it becomes a pretty challenging reach to buy that for a community garden.
Okay, we have a meeting with Becca.
Yeah.
On Friday.
Becca's the community garden lead. Yeah, so are you talking to her about these additional sites or about? Okay, great.
Yeah, so we can follow up on that later.
Yeah, and Becca and I are in conversation pretty regularly around these. So I may also then hear from her. She's pretty good at checking in with me when kind of funding matters come up from neighborhoods. So cool. So that's great. That'll be a good closed loop conversation.
The other question I have is related to an affordable project that is currently being designed in Lindale and is including a park green space playground component. Is there a way that Minneapolis Park money can be used to help an affordable housing partner develop that aspect of a project?
Only under the following parameters. That land on which those improvements are made, so the playground land, would either have to be deeded to the park board or it would have to go under a permanent easement to the park board. So in order to spend park dedication fees, we would have to have perpetual control of that property. It would then become beholden to all the rules of the park board. It would be fully open to the public according to the ordinances of the park board. And it would actually become part of the quote public forum where people are allowed to protest, to gather, and to do any other activity that is legal in the parks. Lots of developers don't particularly want that to happen on their quote unquote captive playgrounds and green spaces. We have done that in some cases with developers, most often for like trail connections. But I also think we'd have to consider whether it's kind of redundant infrastructure. So for us to spend park dedication money on new facilities when we don't have master plans that are saying we're in a park gap, then I think we would question whether we should really be investing in Painter Park or kind of in the existing infrastructure according to our master plans.
Okay, I'll pass that information on to the developer, or Jim, you can.
Follow up to that. What's the metric for the gap? Just so we understand, is there a document, is there a map, or is there just sort of a rule of thumb in terms of distances between things or so forth?
Yeah, typically these are mapped in the master plans. So so the Southwest Service Area Master Plan does identify park search areas, number one.
Okay.
But it does also show for different amenity types, it has maps, individual maps with like rings. And so you can see where the service is low. For instance, in the very northern part of the service area up around Stevens Square and such, it's very low for courts. And so we might not want like a whole park there, but even getting like a court somewhere could be beneficial. So we're looking both at kind of full parks with that park search thing, but we're also looking for specific facilities that might be in gaps. So it'll depend a little bit on what might be built as like a standalone. And we've talked with some urban neighborhoods. We've talked about, wow, if this redevelops, if we could just get, instead of their huge parking lot, if we could get a parking lot and then like a couple of pickleball courts over in the corner, and then that fills a court gap and also a facility type, that we don't have much of, like that could work. That would be interesting. But again, part of it is like, I would want to see like exactly kind of where those sites might be, because we have to, if they're across the street from Painter or for King Park, I'd kind of be like, no, we need to invest in our existing parks. So it's a little bit of a judgment call, but the master plan provides some guidance.
Okay, I will try to find a link to that. I'm not finding it right now. Other Lindell questions?
I can drop some stuff in the chat here.
I'll just pitch in on Lindell because I'm curious because we were talking about. So I did pull up the master plan for the park for Painter. It's $4.7 million. It's the total estimated build out of all the elements that are in the master plan. So the skate park or phase one that's currently put out there represents a little less than maybe about 20% of that. And so what I believe I heard that Adam was that this next $800,000, which is sort of this intra-park transfer situation going on, this sort of weird,
good phrase.
Only good government agencies working together in complex conundrums can come up with these kind of things, but it makes sense. So what I'm hearing then is if we got $900,000 in the kitty, towards 4.7 million, and then another 800 are going to come in because of this extra special situation. We've bitten off 1.7 of $4.7 million of potential things. And that's irregardless, that's just capital improvement money, right? So then as park dedication fees roll in, say this big project, this, there's 200 units being proposed, okay? That's a big number. That's a really big number. I think, did we figure that was like 20, what did we figure out that was like $400,000 or $500,000 for a 200 unit building? It's a serious, but acre size.
330.
Yeah. So that project alone, plus what's in the pot right now, could add, let's say $500,000 sometime in the next couple of years, right? Maybe other things will pop up along the way, but it wouldn't be of that order of magnitude. So is that essentially the math? 1.7 in capital expenditures, we're going to have a double dip because of this weird timing thing. But then after that, it's going to be a while by what I heard. And so really the way that the rest of the Painter Park project gets played out is probably largely through these dedication fees, because we got $3 million with potential upgrades left. And hey, $500,000, it's going to go a long way. But there's still a long way to go. So you got a big bucket to fill, and you get very small squirts, over time. And even a big project, can only put a dent in another 1/6 of the remaining funding.
You have hit it on the head exactly. With one addition that I would make is that there are a couple of other potential funding sources that can also come in outside of our core CIP. So we do use rehabilitation funds, which I guess are in the core CIP, but they're not aligned to specific park projects. But we can use rehabilitation funds to do things, and those are eligible in all parks across the system, and they're allocated based on infrastructure need. So if I can't think of anything in Painter specifically, but if a park has a basketball court that's going to stay a basketball court and needs repaving, that's not going to be a CIP project. That's going to be a rehabilitation project, right? So that gets taken care of outside of that ranked allocation. So that's the first one. And the second one is we get grants and donations for parks. We get Hennepin Youth Sports money to do things. So there's other outside funding that we're regularly looking for to bolster those base CIP allocations. And at times, there are specialist community groups like pickleball people and clay court tennis people and bike park people that come forward and fundraise. And so there have been examples in parks where there's been those kind of things that have been implemented. At Waveland Triangle in the Linden Hills neighborhood, we implemented a clay court that was done with private fundraising, and it implements the master plan. So I always told people with our master plans, when I got pressed on, why aren't you aligning these plans to the exact budget you have? I would say that I feel like our plans need to be aspirational, but not egregiously aspirational. Because if we align to the money we know we have, we'll sell ourselves short, because there is more money out there. There's more park dedication money coming in. There's grant money. There's other money. So we should
over 20 years. I mean, that's a long horizon. 10 years, long horizon. 20 is even longer. That's the whole. That's the master plan's arc. So there's the other thing that I would add, just for perspective with regard to Painter, is the percentages that you're talking about there in terms of implementation of the master plan. Painter's way ahead of most parks. So, after that first or even second bite of the apple, I mean, there are parks that haven't even gotten a bite of the apple yet. So they're going to be way down the list when they're way down the list. Attitude. Yeah. So
I just want to be real with you all that that though it doesn't look like we're getting all the way on implementation at Painter, we have made the decision. We made the decision early on to do smaller bites for 20 years of every apple in the system, rather than finish a few apples, because we would have only finished like a quarter of the apples. And then 3/4 of the parks and 3/4 of the neighborhoods would have seen no benefit from that tax increase.
Not a good political strategy. It's a good one. I appreciate the thought that went into that. And also it allows this opportunity for over time. I don't know if you know very closely or not. I did have one question on that. It just relates to this rehabilitation thing. And I asked it because of this bizarre situation with the aquatic situation. I live in Kingfield, but I live right at the tip edge of it. So Painter Park's the park we've been to forever. So that's why I'm so knowledgeable about the park. Is there a reason? Do you know of any reason why, or maybe you can ask around about? I thought I saw that the playground was being slated for replacement. And I was curious to figure out why. Do you have any history or thought process behind why that has been in the plan? Because it doesn't seem like it needs replacement. It could use a little love, but that's why I was like, $20,000 of rehab money would take that playground pretty much back to being a top-notch thing. So I'm curious to know if you have any ideas.
So you mean in the master plan, the playground is slated for replacement?
I believe I saw that, and it had something to do with, we need to move some elements of it because of the idea of the splash pad coming, but really the splash pad's going in the parking lot.
Yeah, so I
couldn't quite figure out what the logic was behind that.
Yeah, let me, I'm going to share my screen. I pulled up the Painter master plan.
Oh, good. Okay. I brought it up and I lost it. So I tried to do the same thing.
I pulled it up here, and
right.
Without reading the narrative, like how I'm reading the plan is that the playground, which is here at C, you can see on the aerial photograph here, this is listed as an existing feature, which essentially means that we would rehabilitate it when it needs it, but we're not going to move that playground, and we're not going to proactively replace it. There will be a cost estimate number for it, and that's only because we expect that over the 30-year life of the plan, we're going to have to replace that playground.
Way down the line.
But it's probably way down the line. And that's why when we started this implementation project at Painter, and we asked internal staff and we asked community about what are the priorities, nobody said the playground. They all said, we should do all this, right? So that's why we do that engagement at the time of implementation.
Got it. All right. I think some of that got lost in translation because we've been in master plan mode because this thing was ranked so highly, it's gotten so many, and then we jumped right into, I mean, it's been a couple of years, but in park board planning time, it's pretty quick.
Yeah, and in fact, the allocations to Painter were in place during the master planning effort, and we had to hold implementation until we had a master plan, and then went right into the implementation. So it was a pretty kind of turnkey, and not all parks are that way.
Right.
Hey, Adam, I have a question on
lucky
mechanics.
Yeah.
Excuse me, can I ask a question on mechanics here of the dedication piece? Back to what you were saying in terms of you really don't have the money until you get the money. What's the threshold point in a development project when it's determined that money needs to go into your coffers?
When they pay their building permit, that's the moment. So when they pull a building permit, they pay for that permit, they pay a variety of different fees, and the park dedication fee, typically it's a fee. The park dedication fee is one of those fees that they pay. And so when they give that check to the city, and at the end of every month, the city sends a list of the projects that have paid fees, and then they send us a check for all the fees. So that's the moment it becomes real.
So that helps. And then another part to that, in a development project where there's some public money going into some portion of it for affordable housing, but some of it's going to be a market rate. Is the market rate portion of that project qualify for park dedication fees, or is the whole project exempt from park dedication fees?
No, only the affordable units are exempt. So all the market rate units and then any associated retail or office will still pay the fee.
Thank you.
I had a question about equity. I was kind of clicking on the map that you provided the link to, and just noticed like Southwest, the sum available, it's like pretty huge in most neighborhoods, and then clicked in North a little bit and the amount is pretty minimal, and just was curious what the equity thoughts are like throughout the city in that way.
Yeah, park dedication fees are terribly inequitable.
Yeah.
Full stop.
But,
but because it's a developer fee, it has to benefit the people who paid the fee. And that has been codified in case law that has gone all the way to the Supreme Court. And park dedication ordinances in cities get struck down with some regularity when cities try to push away from that nexus, because the very people that don't want to pay that fee are the people with all the money to sue, and it's the developers, right? If the ones who are going to sue were the neighborhood groups, I think these would survive. But it's exactly because it is the developers that can benefit from having this vacated. And believe me, they fought this for years in court before it was adopted in 2014. So we have to be very careful. Believe me, everybody on this call, I hate the "my hands are tied" statement that I have to make when we talk about equity and park dedication fees. And you can see from our involvement, from my direct involvement in the equity metrics that we use to select our capital projects, that the park board is really trying to empirically bring equity into our practices. So this bugs me. Maybe that's too weak a word, but I literally don't think there's anything we can do about it. I cannot take, wedge money and move it to the north side. We cannot shave 10% off the top of every fee paid and move it to somewhere else, because this will get struck down so fast. This fee since 2014 has generated $25 million for parks. And that's only going to go up in the next 6, 7, 8 years. And so we'd lose all of that.
Adam, have you had the conversation yet about what happens if or when neighborhood associations start merging, which is what the city's really pushing right now?
So there are, so in the ordinance, the nexus is the neighborhood area, not the neighborhood organization. There are neighborhoods that are already merged. So Nokomis East Neighborhood Association serves 4 neighborhoods. When I talk to them about park dedication, I'm like, you got to give me 4 different recommendations. The Longfellow Community Council serves 4 neighborhoods. And 3 of those neighborhoods have significant dollar amounts available within them. But they have to make 3 separate recommendations, because it's not Longfellow Community Council money. It is Hiawatha, Howe, Longfellow, Cooper. So if Kingfield and Lindale ever merged, we'd be having the same conversation, which is, here's what's available in Lindale, here's what's available in Kingfield. It's just that you all would be in the same association.
Well, this is the model cities map that you're driven by, right?
What's that?
This is the model cities map you're driven by, where the community councils were established, and then from that the neighborhoods were established, and you're driven by those 80 or 82 or whatever neighborhoods in the city right now, right?
Yeah, those are, and that's written into the ordinance. It's considered the whatever 80 something official city of Minneapolis neighborhood areas. And if those neighborhood areas themselves got bigger, the nexus might have to be redefined, because you'd start having areas that you could potentially invest too distant from the places where the fee was paid. So like, you'd be like way beyond a half mile, or in some cases a mile. And I think that would be seen as suspect.
Okay, so we're almost out of time, but can we talk about Kingfield really quickly?
Absolutely.
And I'm going to see what Kelly just put in the chat here.
Yeah, I think from what we've heard tonight, which is why I was asking all these questions, because I figure we're going to have a whole other meeting about Kingfield, because there's a lot of housing units coming online, and it's going to be a lot more money.
Right, so, but I don't know what's been paid yet. So Adam,
no, I know, but those projects are under construction. Like that, that money is inbound right now. Like my money's inbound right now. I'll be paying that fee like next week. Anybody else who's already digging, you know, Dan's project, you know, obviously the fees we already saw on the map from the current site. So those are not like speculative. They're going to happen before the end of this year. And I think we added up $700,000 from the money we were looking at just the last go around because of that. And, you know, there's no more we know of out there at the moment south of 36. But anyways, it's a considerable amount of money. And so now that I understand the methodology, I can start putting my head around the MLK note here. But I just, for the purpose of just kind of finishing a conversation, I think it was very helpful. And then so Adam, just one more question on Painter, because I'm just kind of finishing my thought process. I can pretty quickly look here and see what things were being discussed in phase one, which is the skate park, the tennis court, the Foursquare area, the full court basketball, and the climbable boulder seating area, and kind of come up with the budget. So theoretically, that $1.7 million is going to cover a lot. However, once the splash pad gets that, because I know the money is sort of tied to the splash pad. So you have to kind of, that's sort of one of the interesting things that kind of is a jigsaw puzzle of there's $1.7 million, but out of that $1.7 million, a splash pad has to appear, right? Because that's part of the transfer thought process is you can't just dump the money into the park willy-nilly. An aquatic feature would have to come out, right? Or somehow come out of that process once that money's moved over.
I think I'm following you.
Right, because we don't.
I'm not sure where the $1.7
that gets moved one time. It gets moved to be dedicated towards an aquatic feature, right? Not just dumped into the pot.
That would be the intent.
That'd be the intent, right? So I think the thought process there is that the cost, at least the master plan cost, everybody, for what's worth here, is $1.7 million. So theoretically, that $800,000 is only going to cover half the amount of that theoretical splash pad. And so if more dollars come in between now and when that happens in a couple of years, theoretically, what we're kind of trying to do, if the splash pad is the you know, what we want to get done at that point in time, you're almost like banking up because we're close enough to see it coming. And so if that project moves forward, let's say the next 2 years, this big one we're talking about, that $500,000 would get you a pretty long way to closing that aquatics gap. Whereas the other money that's already been, that $900,000 that's already been earmarked for phase one, plus the $40,000 or $50,000 going around the couch cushions, that's going to essentially help cover the rest of this phase one that was going to try to start next summer, right? So we're kind of through the end of 2022, there's kind of a hunk. And then that 200-year project it's a ways down the road. So it wouldn't even be in play probably to the next cycle, but it would be something that if it did come through or other products come through, we're kind of working back up to, we only have half the amount of money or 3/4 or whatever. There's going to need to be some backfill before a splash pad project would even be fully feasible, right? Because the amount that's coming from the Lindale school park pad is only going to go so far towards that feature. Is that a fair statement?
It is, and recognize that the cost estimates in those master plans are extremely conservative.
Right, certainly, but still it's an order of magnitude of twice. So it can't be that far off where it's like, yeah, $800,000 is going to cover it all, probably by the time we have inflation to that point. It's conservative because we got to eat in construction inflation, which is 6% a year right now. So we add 25% by the time we get to 3 years. So 4 years out. So I mean, it's got to be that way for a reason if we're talking about real dollars. So
yeah, it's hard. It's hard to say sitting here at this point.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Well, I just want to put a closure on that. Hopefully that was helpful for everybody in Lindale to sort of be able to look at this table and kind of talk through the math, and that there is, even though there's a special dollar figure coming through, it's not just going to get dumped into it. Theoretically, the splash pad becomes the quote unquote phase two, because that's going to be the piece. I'm really glad to hear too that the playground may get very small little bits of money or whatever like that, but not from that bucket, because it's a refurb. And it's not eligible for these dedication fees and everything else as well. So, okay,
right.
That's enough on that. Anything really pertinent for Kingfield? Do we just want to, I could just pull up that same chart, but it sounds like there's going to be quite a bit of money. Do you have the total amount of money? Did you have that on hand already, Adam?
There's $216,000 available right now.
216.
And do you have a list in front of you of which projects those came from?
I can. Give me one moment.
I'm pretty sure
I'll just take this opportunity to share the map and.
Yeah, I think when we looked at the map last meeting, it was just Michael Pink's project that had hit the map at that point, but that was a month ago, so it could have been updated since.
So here's Kingfield.
I can't click on your screen.
Here's Kingfield. I'm gonna drive, but here's Kingfield. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 projects that are contributing to that 216. I don't need to go through them all right now, but so that you all can see, if you click on the neighborhood here, you'll get that sum available, right? If you click on one of the dots, you're going to get the address and what that dot paid. Okay, so this one, 3042, this must have been a duplex. That's 2 units, basically accounts for 3042, right? So, and then, you know, this is
the big ones right there.
That's the big one. And then, yeah, and here's 79,000. Yeah. Right, so you can go through, that's a single unit, you know, so if somebody puts a house on a vacant lot, that's what they're gonna pay. Or did pay in 2020, it's a little bit more now. So that's how that works. And you can see on this map, the red ones are ones that have been allocated to projects. So if I click here in Lindale, it says it's been allocated to Painter Park plan implementation. See that? And then the green ones have been already spent. Right, so this one was spent at Phelps Field splash pad and play area. So the green ones mean that it's in the ground, basically.
Okay, so so I think there's one more large project coming on board in Kingfield, and then your project, Jim.
So about $80,000 by quick math.
And there will be more in the future, obviously. My general question is, I know you had talked about trails and connections. My assumption is that's all off-road. Has anything ever been done with park dedication fees for an on-road bike trail connection?
We have not yet, no.
Okay, but it would be considered?
I think we'd have to talk it through internally. Whether, and by on-road, you're talking about like basically striping and signage.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so for instance, there's a couple really wide right-of-ways, like 44th Street, which runs way across the neighborhood and dead end straight into the lake. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, it's got more right-of-way than you could ever possibly use. I mean, this is not something we've talked about, but I can just give you an example for, that road is like 35, 36 feet curb to curb. It's like insanely large for a street that carries no traffic, right? It's not it's east-west non-thoroughfare between 42nd and 46th. That's not a thing. So anyways, those are kind of things I think of as like, you know, certainly MLK Park has some other things, but MLK Park just got a bunch of stuff done to it. And so, you know, the park, you know, it's a lot of things have already been done. So anyways, those are other interesting conversations. $300,000 is something, but it's not that much. So that's why I was going to look to see how much is left.
So what I usually suggest to neighborhood organizations, and I think for Kingfield, you know, this is a good place for you to be right now, which is kind of armed with the basics from tonight and some good discussion. I think it's worth looking at the King Park Master Plan first to see if there's anything in there that would be a priority for you, knowing that King Park is not going to have a CIP investment until probably 2028 at the earliest. And part of what's driving that is that it has been invested in quite recently, right? So its number is lower. So if there are things in that park that would be new, that are of interest, pickleball courts, I don't know, there's stuff in there that's new. I would suggest a prioritization exercise by the neighborhood. And then you can communicate with me, or we can have another conversation in an open forum, or however you want to do it. And then I can figure out when we can kind of bear that from a staffing capacity standpoint to break off a standalone project there. But this is exactly why I want to consult with you, is like, what would be your priorities, especially in that park, to implement the master plan? And if there are other ideas in the neighborhood, you're talking about connections and things like that, weigh those too and put those on a prioritized list. Don't take anything off the table right now, because I'd rather you have ideas that come forward where I can say, I just don't think that's quite eligible, rather than you're editing yourself. Because I think we can be pretty flexible and open in the spirit of the ordinance. But the key piece is like, what are your priorities? And that's what I'd love to kind of hear next. That's the conversation I'd like to hear next. And whether that's you all having a conversation among yourselves or with a broader community group and coming back to me, or whether we want to convene another kind of conversation with a bigger group, it's up to you.
Awesome.
My request then is, since I know there's a lot of, so this document was drawn obviously a few years ago, essentially. And so could we get a listing of which things have already been completed, like the playground? I don't know, maybe there's other things besides the playground that have been done that maybe I'm just not aware of or wouldn't think of. So that way we're not, some things on the proposed list may have already gotten done because of the reconstruction there, so. Yeah,
the master plan sort of post-dated the reconstruction.
Oh, okay.
So,
oh, I do see it. It is under existing features, isn't it? Okay.
Yeah, play areas under existing features, and then,
okay.
So I think you're pretty safe here to like the things that are kind of proposed design features would be eligible, generally speaking.
Yeah, anything, as long as it doesn't say renovate, like it says renovate existing wading pool, that's not gonna work.
We can often add some park dedication to wading pool renovations because we're increasing capacity and accessibility when we do it. But we can't only fund wading pool renovations with park dedication. So we typically have to have a base funding, and then we supplement because they're bigger and they're accessible, and that increases capacity.
Got it. Okay, that bucket, just for what it's worth for everyone else not staring at it, is $9 million. That includes a couple big chunks, $2 million for clubhouse communication, which I think is the thing up on the hill by 40th, and then $1 million for the athletic fields, another $1 million for the wading pool, just shy of $1 million for play areas. I'm not sure why there's more than that, but I guess it must be thinking way down the line. And then parking lot fixes is about 850. And walking pass is about $1 million. So there's some big chunks in there.
And again, the play areas, they're in there, even if they don't need immediate renovation for the reasons I said before. And typically those play area numbers look highly inflated because we will always assume that we're replacing the entire container if it has failed. If we can renovate a playground into an existing container, it's like 30% of that number. But to be conservative, we try to assume that we may have to replace an entire container for failures for drainage reasons and all that. So if those playground numbers look shocking, that's why. We're usually doing playgrounds for a lot less than that.
Other questions for everybody else? So Kingfield folks, we can take this up again at a future conversation, but this definitely provides very much useful insight to how we might structure those conversations and future conversations with you all, obviously, too.
I think that's it for tonight. Thank you, Adam, for your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you all for for engaging in this. We want to get this money out into the community, like serving the community. And there's a lot of money and it takes us a while to do it, but we do want to move this money into the parks so that people can benefit from it. I believe that's what we're doing at Painter right now. We're moving it into the park pretty quickly. And if there are ideas at Kingfield where we can get some of this money moved into parks there, even in advance of the 2028 allocation, I'm happy to keep working with you on how to do that. So I appreciate your investment in the topic.
Thanks,
Great.
Adam. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. See you all
Night
later.
all.
I put a couple links in the chat for anybody who wants to click on them or copy them
Oh
out.
yeah. So if people want to look at them, open them up before we close the meeting or you lose access to them. So great. Thanks, Adam. Nice to meet you.
Bye, everybody.